She confirmed her flight while listened from the doorway. 30 seconds later I was on the floor. But the kitchen recorder caught everything, including his confession about Grandma's accident. Now he is serving life plus 75 years. Chapter 1. The phone call had barely ended when I felt it. That strange shift in the air that makes the hairs on the back of your neck rise before your brain has time to name it. The airline had just confirmed my grandmother's flight. Her name spoken out loud by a robotic voice, followed by the chime that meant it was final. I smiled because I knew how badly she wanted that trip, how many times she had circled the destination in her travel magazines. I thought I was giving her freedom. What I didn't know was that I had just signed my own invitation to the darkest night of my life. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner, the kind Grandma always insisted on. My phone buzzed against the counter, and I tapped it off with the edge of my hand. I remember how normal everything seemed. The tick of the wall clock, her soft humming as she moved about the room, the kind of domestic quiet that makes you believe nothing bad can touch you when you're home. And then it broke. A shoe dragged lightly against the doorway tile. A sound so small I might have ignored it, but my body caught it before my mind did. I turned half an inch, and that's when something hard, heavy, and cold slammed against the side of my skull. The impact shot light through my eyes, and I went down before I had time to scream. The worst part wasn't the pain. It wasn't the taste of blood in my mouth or the sharp crack of my head meeting the floor tiles. No, the worst part was his voice. Smooth, confident, too calm for what he had just done. "That takes care of her," he muttered. "Just like it did with the old woman. Paperwork's already set. No one will ask." I lay there half-conscious, cheek pressed against the cold floor, the citrus smell mixing with the metallic tang of my own blood. My vision blurred, but my ears worked fine. I heard him moving. Careless, almost arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. And maybe he was. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, was that I had left my tiny kitchen recorder on the counter. It was something I used to remind myself of: grocery lists, little recipes, random ideas I didn't want to lose. That night, it caught the sound of his confession. That night, his arrogance became his undoing. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the world around me was darkening at the edges, my thoughts slipping in and out like radio static. My grandmother's humming had stopped, and the last thing I felt before my body gave out was a crushing wave of helplessness. If you've ever been forced to lie still while someone rewrites your life right in front of you, then you know the kind of fear I'm talking about. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. When I woke up again, the first thing I heard wasn't my grandmother's voice, or the comforting sound of the kitchen clock. It was the relentless beep of a heart monitor, steady and clinical. White walls surrounded me, too clean, too bright. The sharp smell of disinfectant burned my nose, reminding me that I wasn't safe at home. I was in a hospital bed. And I was alone. The nurse told me I'd been found on the floor by a neighbor who heard the thud. She said my uncle had been notified, that he was already handling things with the estate. The word estate hit me harder than the blow to my skull. My grandmother was gone. Just like that. I tried to explain. I tried to tell them what I heard. That Corbin Hale, my grandmother's financial advisor, the man everyone in town seemed to trust, had whispered something about her accident. But he admitted it right there, with me lying on the floor. But no one wanted to hear it. "You're emotional," my uncle said when he finally came. He straightened his tie like he always did when he didn't want to make eye contact. "Concussions make people confused. Corbin has been nothing but helpful. Don't make this harder than it is." I wanted to scream, to throw the stand across the room. But all I could do was lie there, staring at the slow drip of the bag above me, listening to the beep, beep, beep of the monitor. It felt worse than being locked in a cell. At least in a cell, you know you've been seen. Here I was invisible. In those days my world shrank down to details. The uneven tick of my grandmother's mantel clock, which I swore he had tampered with after she died. The faint citrus scent still clinging to my sweater from that night. The ugly bruise pattern on my temple that looked suspiciously like the edge of Corbin's heavy silver watch. Tiny fragments of truth that nobody else wanted to acknowledge. Have you ever had that feeling? That you're screaming underwater, thrashing, clawing for air, but everyone above the surface just shakes their heads and tells you you're imagining it. That was me. That's where I lived for weeks. But here's the thing about details. When you collect enough of them, they stop being fragments. They become a trail. They lead you somewhere. And if you're patient enough, if you're stubborn enough to keep looking even when people call you crazy, they can lead you straight to the truth. The first breadcrumb came 3 weeks later, in the form of a letter. I was cleaning out Grandma's cedar chest, the one that smelled of old wood and lavender sachets she always tucked inside. At the bottom, wedged between a faded recipe book and an envelope of stamps, I found a folded sheet of paper in her wavering handwriting. If anything happens, it read, ask about the changes. They told me to sign quickly. I didn't want to. Something felt wrong. My hands shook as I read it. My grandmother was many things. Careful, deliberate, almost painfully slow to make decisions, but she was never careless. If she said something felt wrong, it meant it was. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at her old desk with the letter beside me, flipping through folders of tax papers, insurance forms, bank statements. That's when I found it, a draft will. It looked almost identical to the one Corbin had filed, except the signature line was blank. The date was off by 2 months. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just stolen money. He hadn't just manipulated documents. He had stolen time, voice, and truth. He had tried to erase her. The next morning I made a choice. I wasn't going to let him win. But I also knew I couldn't fight him alone. That decision to seek help was the one thing Corbin hadn't counted on. And it was the one thing that would eventually bring him down. And that, my friends, is where the real story begins. Because just when I thought I was powerless, I was about to meet the person who would turn my scattered fragments into a weapon sharp enough to cut through Corbin's lies. But before I tell you about her, let me ask you, if you found a letter like that, hidden away, warning of changes and rushed signatures, what would you do? Would you risk everything to dig deeper, even if it meant your own family turned against you? Drop your answers in the comments, I want to know. Because the truth is, I almost gave up. But then I met her, and the game changed. Chapter 2. I didn't expect to find her in a church basement. That was the last place on earth I thought my search for answers would lead me. Yet there I was, sitting in a metal folding chair, the kind that squeaks if you shift too much, staring at a stranger who looked at me like she already knew my pain. Her name was Marla Keene. At least, that's how she introduced herself when the meeting began. She was older than me, maybe in her early 50s, with streaks of gray cutting through her dark hair. There was something sharp about her eyes, though, something that told me she had seen too much and forgotten nothing. The meeting wasn't about grief, not officially. It was advertised on a community board as a support group for survivors of betrayal. That phrase alone hooked me. Survivors of betrayal. I thought maybe it was about infidelity or divorce. But the more I listened, the clearer it became that most of these people weren't here because of broken marriages. They were here because of broken trust. Money stolen. Families divided. Names smeared. One man talked about how his brother had tricked their parents into signing over property. Another woman described being written out of her mother's will after a caregiver convinced her to revise the documents. Different faces, different stories, but one common thread. The betrayal always came from someone they thought they could trust. I didn't say much that first night. Just listened. My grandmother's letter sat folded in my jacket pocket, burning against my chest. By the time the session ended, I knew I needed to speak to Marla. I waited until most people left, until the scraping of chairs and the shuffle of coats faded down the hall. She was stacking papers into a folder when I approached. "Can I ask you something?" said. She glanced up, and those sharp eyes of hers softened just slightly. "You've been quiet tonight. Go ahead." I pulled the folded letter from my pocket and slid it across the table. She read it silently, her mouth tightening as her eyes scanned the page. When she finished, she didn't hand it back. She just looked at me. "Who's Corbin?" she asked. "Her advisor," I whispered. "Her murderer." The word felt strange in my mouth. Too heavy. Too dangerous. But I couldn't call it anything else. Marla leaned back in her chair. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the night in the kitchen, about the confession I heard, about the will and the draft version with no signature. I told her about my uncle dismissing me, about everyone treating me like I was just some emotional girl who couldn't handle grief. When I finished, Marla was quiet. She tapped her nails against the table, slow and steady like a ticking clock. Then she leaned forward. "You're not crazy," she said. "And you're not alone." For the first time since that night, I felt something crack inside me. Not despair. Not helplessness. Something else. Something stronger. Oh. And yet, hope is dangerous. Makes you believe you can fight giants. It makes you believe justice is possible in a world built to protect men like Corbin Hale. Why do you believe me? Asked. Marla smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, almost bitter. Because I've met him before. Not Corbin, but men like him. Smooth talkers. Paper manipulators. The kind who think signatures are stronger than blood. They're all the same. And they all make mistakes. Her words lit a fire in me. For weeks, I had been gaslit, silenced, dismissed. Now, someone was not only listening but also validating what I knew deep down. My grandmother hadn't just died. She had been erased. Here's what you're going to do, Marla said. You're going to stop acting like a victim. You're going to start collecting paper trails, conversations, timelines. If you want to bring him down, you need more than suspicion. You need ammunition. Her words hit me like a command. For once, someone wasn't telling me to sit quietly, to move on, to accept the official version of the story. She was telling me to fight. And fight I would. But that night, as I walked back to my car under the flickering yellow streetlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. My skin prickled. The shadows between the parked cars looked too deep, too alive. I told myself it was just paranoia, but when I reached my car I saw it. A folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. First I thought it was a flyer, but when I opened it my stomach dropped. Stop digging. Just 2 words, written in thick black marker. No name. No explanation. I looked around wildly, but the street was empty. The church windows glowed faintly behind me, but the parking lot was still. Too still. Have you ever had that moment when you realize someone out there knows your secrets? That your private suspicions, the thoughts you've barely said out loud, have somehow leaked into the world? That's what it felt like. Like the walls had ears. Like the shadows were laughing. I shoved the note into my bag and drove off, heart hammering, headlights cutting through the darkness. My mind kept circling the same question. Who knew? Who was watching me? That night I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside felt like a threat. But when morning came I knew one thing. If someone wanted me to stop, it meant I was on the right track. Viewers, let me ask you, if you found a warning note like that, would you keep digging or would you stop? Be honest. Because I'll admit, part of me wanted to stop. Part of me wanted to run. But another part, stronger, sharper, was ready to burn the whole thing down if that's what it took. Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to know what you'd do. Over the next few weeks, Marla and I became partners. She taught me how to request records without raising suspicion, how to look for inconsistencies in paperwork, how to ask questions without sounding like I was asking questions. She was meticulous, relentless. And she pushed me to be the same. We discovered that Corbin had a pattern. He wasn't just targeting my grandmother. There were others, elderly clients whose wills had shifted conveniently before their deaths. Most of the time, the changes favored charities that didn't exist, or trusts managed by shell companies. And every single time, Corbin was the common denominator. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't sloppy paperwork. This was a machine. A system built to funnel money and silence questions. But here's the thing about machines. If you jam one small gear, the whole thing starts to grind. And Marla believed we had just the gear. It was my recorder. The tiny kitchen gadget I had forgotten about until the night of the attack. When I finally checked it, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. The audio was faint, muffled by distance and background noise. But his words were there. His voice was there. That smug, careless confession. Just like it did with the old woman. Paperwork's already set. No one will ask. I played it for Marla, and her eyes lit up. This is it, she said. This is the crack in his armor. But here's the thing about cracks. Once you expose them, once you start pushing, the whole structure can come crashing down. Because Corbin wasn't stupid. He was powerful. He had connections. He had money. And he wasn't about to let some grieving granddaughter and a bitter ex-accountant destroy him. The first threat was the note. The second was worse. It came on a rainy Tuesday night, when I returned home to find my front door unlocked. I froze on the porch, rain dripping down my hair, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly I pushed the door open. The living room looked normal. Too normal. Except for one thing. On the coffee table sat a single object. My grandmother's wedding ring. I had buried it with her. Chapter 3. The sight of that ring froze me where I stood. My grandmother's gold band sat gleaming under the lamp like it had been waiting for me. Perfectly centered on the coffee table. Not tilted, not tossed, not forgotten. Placed. Deliberately placed. I swear the air thinned in the room, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My chest tightened. That ring had been on her finger the day we lowered her into the ground. I remember because I kissed her hand right above it before the casket closed. So how was it sitting in my living room now? My first instinct was to run. Slam the door shut, call the police, call anyone. But I didn't. I stepped inside. Hello. My voice cracked. Is someone here? Silence answered me. The house looked the same. The faded rug, the family photos on the wall, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. But suddenly everything felt wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't name. I forced myself to move closer to the ring. My hand shook as I reached for it. It was warm. Not hot, not fresh from a hand, but not cold either. Like it had been held, touched, before being set down. That's when I noticed the folded paper beneath it. One line, written in the same black marker as the first note. You can't bury the past. My throat closed. Whoever had been here didn't just want to scare me. They wanted to prove something. They had been close enough to touch her things. Close enough to get inside my locked house. Close enough to know exactly how to rattle me. I sank onto the couch, clutching the ring, the paper crumpled in my fist. For a moment I thought about giving up. About handing everything to the police and washing my hands of it. But then I remembered how they had looked at me last time. With that polite patience reserved for women who misremember things. They wouldn't believe me. Not without proof. And proof meant digging deeper. Friends, let me ask you this. If you found something that should have been buried with your loved one suddenly sitting in your living room, would you take it as a warning? Or as a challenge? Drop your answer below. Because in that moment, I knew what my answer had to be. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight harder. The next morning, I showed Marla the ring and the note. Her lips pressed into a hard line as she turned them over in her hands. He's watching you, she said flatly. I locked the door, I whispered. Locks don't matter to men like him. Money buys keys. Money buys silence. But maybe. She set the ring down carefully. Maybe money can't buy everything. She was already on the phone before I could ask what she meant. That's how I met Martin Reyes, the attorney who would become my unlikely ally. He wasn't polished, not like Corbin. His suits were a little wrinkled. His office smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and his tie knot was always just a little crooked. But there was something in his eyes. A steadiness. He listened as I laid everything out. The letter, the draft will, the confession on the recorder, the threats. He didn't interrupt. He didn't sigh. He didn't accuse me of exaggerating. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers together and said, You're right. A slip. That recorder is a nail in his coffin. But we'll need more nails. A lot more. He explained it simply. Judges don't move on emotion, they move on evidence. And men like Corbin, men with wealth and influence, knew exactly how to bury evidence under a mountain of paperwork. So we began to climb that mountain. Day after day, I combed through my grandmother's files. Bank statements, letters, even old Christmas cards. Anything that might hold a clue. Marla taught me what to look for. Inconsistencies, odd signatures, unexplained transactions. Martin guided us on what could actually hold up in court. The trail wasn't neat. It was messy, scattered, buried in the ordinary. But slowly, it began to form a picture. One withdrawal stood out. $3,200 to an airline, 2 days before she died. It matched the ticket I had confirmed on the phone that night. She was planning to leave. That much was certain. But then a deposit showed up. Not into her account, but into one of Corbin's shell companies. The amount. Almost identical. Like she had paid and he had taken it back. I stared at the numbers, my pulse racing. He cancelled her trip, I whispered. He never planned to let her go. Marla nodded grimly. He didn't just take her money. He took her choice. That realization hollowed me out. All my grandmother had wanted was one trip, one small escape after a lifetime of giving to everyone else. And he had stolen even that. Do you know what it feels like when someone steals time from you? Not money, not possessions, but time itself. That's what he did. He carved out her future, erased it, and left me with nothing but ashes. I slammed the folder shut, my hands trembling. We have to stop him. But Corbin was already moving. That same week, Martin received notice that Corbin had filed motions to expedite the estate transfer. He wanted everything signed, sealed, distributed, before we could even gather our case. Martin cursed under his breath. He knows you're digging. He's speeding up. Panic clawed at me, but Marla put a hand on mine. Then we speed up too. We worked day and night. Martin drafted emergency motions, Marla tracked documents. I hunted for anything that could slow him down. My apartment turned into a war room, papers covering every surface, the recorder playing back Corbin's words until I could hear them in my sleep. That takes care of her. Just like it did with the old woman. Over and over, his voice taunted me. And every time I heard it, my resolve hardened. But then, something happened that shook me to my core. One evening, I returned home to find a voicemail waiting. The voice was distorted, mechanical, but the words were clear. "Drop it, Marielle. Or you'll end up like her." My knees gave out. I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching the phone, tears stinging my eyes. For a moment I thought about quitting. For a moment I thought about giving in. But then I looked at the ring. My grandmother's ring, still sitting on the table where I had left it. I picked it up, slid it onto my finger and whispered, "Not this time." Viewers, I need to know, if someone threatened you directly, if they told you to stop digging or risk your life, would you back down? Or would you push harder, knowing the danger? Write it below because your answer tells me more about who you are than anything else. The threats didn't stop me. If anything, they fueled me. But what I didn't realize then was that pushing harder meant forcing Corbin's hand. And when men like him are forced, they stop playing games. One night, as I was leaving Martin's office, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. First I brushed it off. It's a city, cars follow you. But block after block, turn after turn, the headlights stayed with me. They sped up. They sped up. My chest tightened. I took a sharp left onto a smaller road, heart pounding. The car followed. I don't remember every detail, just the terror. The way my hands gripped the wheel, the way my breath came in short, ragged gasps. I finally pulled into a crowded gas station, parked right under the fluorescent lights. The other car slowed. Then drove past. I sat there shaking, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Corbin wasn't just threatening me with notes and voicemails anymore. He was watching me, following me, waiting. And deep down I knew. It was only a matter of time before he stopped waiting. Chapter 4. I sat in that gas station parking lot with the fluorescent lights buzzing above me, my hands frozen on the steering wheel. My heart was still racing, my breath shallow. I told myself it was a coincidence, that cars follow other cars all the time. But deep down I knew better. That wasn't just a random driver. That was a message. The kind of message men like Corbin send when they want you to feel small, watched, and powerless. But let me ask you something, viewers. If you knew someone was following you, shadowing you in the dark, would you go to the police even if you feared they'd laugh it off? Or would you stay quiet, keep pushing alone, knowing silence might be safer? I want you to drop your answers in the comments, because I wrestled with that choice all night. When I finally made it home, I couldn't even bring myself to go upstairs. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, clutching my grandmother's ring on my finger like it was some kind of shield. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I stared at the shadows stretching across my living room until dawn. The next morning, I walked into Martin's office with circles under my eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He noticed before I said a word. "What happened?" he asked, leaning forward. "I was followed," I whispered. He didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off. He just sat back, his jaw tightening. "He's testing you. Seeing how close you are." Marla, who had joined us, slammed her hand on the desk. "Enough of this cat and mouse. We have evidence. Play the recording." I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the recorder button. That voice still made my skin crawl, but maybe it was time. Press play. The sound filled the office. Scratchy, low volume. Then clear as glass. "That takes care of her. Just like it did with the old woman. Paperwork's already set. No one will ask." The silence that followed was heavy. Martin leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the recorder. That changes everything. For the first time I saw something shift in his expression. Not doubt, not skepticism, resolve. "We're filing a restraining order on the estate today," he said. He won't touch a cent until this is sorted. He wanted a quick settlement. He's not getting it. Hearing that felt like oxygen filling my lungs for the first time in months. It wasn't victory, but it was a pause, a freeze. Corbin couldn't just erase her with paperwork anymore. But as much as it steadied me, it also terrified me. Because if I knew one thing about Corbin, it was this. When money and control slip through his fingers, he doesn't just sit back. He fights. And his kind of fighting isn't done with fists. It's done with shadows. That night, I returned home to find another note taped to my front door. Stop digging. This one was different, sloppy and rushed. The letters tilted like the writer had been interrupted or nervous. My stomach churned as I peeled it off. Inside, everything looked untouched. But I could feel it again, that shift in the air. Someone had been here. Someone had crossed my lane again. I locked every window, checked every closet, sat with my back against the wall until sunrise. Viewers, I need to pause here and ask you. Have you ever felt someone in a room even when you couldn't see them? That bone-deep certainty that you weren't alone. Because if you have, then you know exactly the kind of fear I was living with. The following week was a blur of court filings, evidence gathering, and sleepless nights. Martin filed motions. Marla examined every document like a surgeon dissecting tissue, and I kept combing through files for breadcrumbs. Piece by piece, the puzzle grew sharper. One discovery nearly made me drop the papers in my hands. A letter of instruction, supposedly from my grandmother, dated 2 weeks before her death. It authorized Corbin to move certain funds. The signature looked like hers. But it wasn't. Marla circled the curve of the D in her last name. See that? She always looped upward. This one hooks down. Classic sign of tracing. My blood boiled. He hadn't just manipulated her. He forged her. He pretended to be her. I pressed my palms to my eyes, willing myself not to scream. He's rewriting her entire life. Martin tapped his pen on the table. Not anymore. We'll expose this. For the first time in weeks, I felt fire instead of fear. But then the fire almost got snuffed out. Late one night, as I was heading back from Martin's office, I found my apartment door cracked open. Just a sliver. Enough to make my blood run cold. I didn't go in. Called Martin first. He told me to wait on the curb, and he rushed over with Marla. When he pushed the door open, the three of us braced ourselves. The apartment looked the same. No broken locks, no smashed windows. But on the kitchen counter, where I had left nothing, sat a single photograph. It was me, asleep in my bed. My breath hitched so hard I nearly passed out. The photo was recent, days ago at most. My same sheets, my same pajamas, my same turned cheek against the pillow. I couldn't stop shaking. Someone had stood in my room while I slept. Martin swore softly, his face pale. This isn't intimidation anymore. This is escalation. Marla put her arm around me, her voice fierce. He thinks he can scare you into silence. But now we've got him. He crossed into criminal territory. I slid down to the floor, my knees giving way. Tears blurred my vision. What if he's right? What if I can't beat him? Martin crouched in front of me, steady and calm. You already beat him, Marielle. The moment you didn't give up. Men like him thrive on silence. You broke it. That's his real fear. His words should have comforted me. And in some small way they did. But I also knew that breaking silence had consequences. Big ones. Viewers, let me ask you honestly. If you woke up to find proof someone had been in your home, watching you sleep, would you keep fighting? Or would you surrender just to make it stop? Leave me your answer, because that's the choice that haunted me every single night. In the days that followed, things moved fast. Martin secured a temporary freeze on the estate. Corbin couldn't touch the money, couldn't sell property, couldn't transfer deeds. For the first time he was cornered. But cornered animals don't surrender. They lash out. I found that out the hard way. One afternoon, I stopped by the cemetery to visit Grandma's grave. It had been weeks since I'd had the courage to go. The grass was still fresh, the soil soft under my shoes. I knelt down, placed the ring on the headstone, whispered a prayer. When I turned to leave, I froze. A figure stood at the tree line, half hidden in shadow, watching. I couldn't see his face, but I knew. I knew it was him. I took a step back, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. He didn't move. Just stood there, like a predator waiting for its prey to falter. I grabbed the ring, clutched it in my fist, and ran to my car. Tires screeched as I tore down the road, tears streaming down my face. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. Chapter 5. I drove home from that cemetery like a hunted animal. My hands shook on the wheel, my knuckles bone white, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. But no matter how fast I went, no matter how many turns I took, I could still feel him. That figure. That presence. By the time I stumbled into my apartment, I was gasping, my chest tight, my head spinning. I locked the door, double-checked it, dragged a chair under the knob, and collapsed onto the couch. Viewers, let me ask you this. What would you do if the man you feared most showed up at a graveyard, the very place you went to find peace? Would you run, would you fight, or would you freeze? Tell me in the comments, because in that moment my instincts were scrambled. The next morning Martin called me. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the strain underneath. We need to push faster, he said. He knows we're closing in. Closing in on what? Yes. Forgery. Fraud. Maybe even worse. He paused. But it won't matter if you're not safe. We need to talk about protection. Protection. The word rattled around in my skull. Protection meant admitting this wasn't just legal anymore. It was personal. It was dangerous. That evening Martin and Marla came to my apartment. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, both of them grave. Marla slid a folder toward me. Inside were documents. More forged letters, more suspicious transfers. Each one a piece of the puzzle, each one damning. "He's cornered," she said, her voice like steel. "He'll get desperate." Martin leaned forward. "That's why I'm recommending you don't stay here alone anymore. At least not until this is resolved." I stared at them. Leave my home. My space. My one fragile sense of control. "I can't," I whispered. "If I run, he wins." Marla reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "Sometimes survival isn't running. Sometimes it's strategy." Her words stuck with me. Strategy. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Every creak in the apartment made me flinch. Every passing car made me jump. But in between the fear, a thought began to take root. What if they were right? What if I needed to outsmart him, not just outlast him? The next morning I made a decision. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, and left the apartment. I didn't tell anyone where I was going except Martin. I drove 3 towns over, checked into a cheap motel under a fake name, and sat on the stiff bedspread with my heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. But peace never lasts long. 2 days later Martin called. His voice was sharp, urgent. "Marielle, we've got something." A bank manager came forward. Said he was pressured to approve transfers. Said Corbin threatened his job if he didn't sign off. I sat up straight, adrenaline surging. "That's proof. That's real proof." "It is," Martin said. "But it also means Corbin knows the walls are closing in. He'll retaliate. Be ready. Be ready." As if I ever could be. That evening, I stepped out of the motel room to grab some food from the gas station next door. When I came back, I froze. The door was ajar. I knew I had locked it. I knew. My breath caught, my pulse spiking. Slowly I pushed the door open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. Nothing looked out of place, until I saw the bed. On the pillow, right where my head had rested, lay another photograph. This one wasn't of me sleeping. This one was of me standing at my grandmother's grave. Taken 2 days earlier. I dropped it, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold onto my phone. Called Martin, my voice shaking. "He knows where I am. He's watching me." Martin's reply was immediate. "Get out. Meet me at my office." I grabbed my bag, my keys, and ran. I didn't even look back. Viewers, imagine this with me. Imagine thinking you've escaped, only to find out the predator has been 2 steps ahead the whole time. Would you keep fighting, or would you break? Tell me, because that question became my entire existence. When I reached Martin's office, he and Marla were waiting. I tossed the photograph on the desk. Martin stared at it, his jaw tight. "This ends," he said. "Tomorrow we file full fraud charges. We go public. We make it impossible for him to hide." Public. The word made my stomach twist. Because going public meant exposure. Meant light. It meant he'd know exactly who had dragged him into it. But maybe that was the point. Maybe hiding had given him too much power already. That night, I sat in Martin's office long after they left. The city lights glowed through the window, casting patterns on the floor. I thought of my grandmother, her laugh, her hands, her warmth. And then I thought of Corbin, erasing all of it like she had never mattered. Well, not anymore. I stood, my hands trembling but my chest steady. If he wanted a war, he'd get one. But wars are messy. And I didn't know yet just how messy this one would get. Because the next morning, as we prepared to file charges, Martin's office phone rang. He answered, and I watched his face drain of color. He hung up slowly, turned to me, his voice grim. "That was the courthouse. The clerk handling our petition is missing." My heart lurched. Missing. Martin's eyes locked with mine. This isn't intimidation anymore. This is corruption. Chapter 6. I remember the first time I walked into the courthouse with Martin and Sienna. My heart was pounding so loud I thought the bailiff would hear it and call me out for contempt. I had never been inside a courtroom that mattered to me. I had sat in on traffic hearings before, maybe paid attention to a jury duty notice, but this was different. This wasn't a stranger's fight. This was my grandmother's entire life being decided by ink, signatures, and whispers in polished suits. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and paper, like every legal building I'd ever passed through. The ceiling buzzed with fluorescent lights. My shoes tapped against the tile, too loud, too nervous. Martin leaned closer as if reading my mind. Don't let the building scare you, he said quietly. It's just walls and lights. What matters is what we put on record. His calmness was steady, but inside I felt like I was about to faint, because I knew what Corbin would do. I knew how smooth he was. He could stand in front of any judge, any jury, and make them believe that he was the only adult in the room while the rest of us were emotional children. That morning, though, I didn't have to prove everything. We were only asking for a freeze, just a pause, just a way to stop him from liquidating the estate, selling land, moving accounts, burying evidence in 1,000 little transactions no one would ever untangle. But even asking for that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I didn't breathe much while Martin spoke. His voice was low, professional, not dramatic. He didn't need fireworks. He just laid down the facts. Irregular signatures, unexplained edits, suspicious timing. Sienna had given him a binder of exhibits, each page marked with sticky notes that stuck out like neon tongues, shouting proof in the judge's direction. The judge, an older man with a tired expression and bags under his eyes, barely looked at us at first. He had seen hundreds of these motions before, I'm sure. Probably expected another family squabble, another niece trying to grab money before an uncle could. And I worried he'd lump me in with every stereotype Corbin would whisper about me later. Emotional, bitter, inventing things. But then the judge flipped to one of the exhibits Sienna had prepared. He paused. He leaned forward. His glasses slid down his nose, and he pushed them back up with a slow finger. He looked again. This signature, he muttered. You're saying it was inserted digitally? Yes, Your Honor, Martin said, calm as ever. Dr. Arlo has provided her preliminary analysis, but the metadata and spacing shifts confirm that this document is inconsistent with authentic originals. The judge sat back. He wasn't ready to make a ruling on fraud that day, not without a full trial, not without weeks of testimony. But he was willing to say one sentence that changed everything for me. Assets are to be held pending further examination. That was it. 9 words. Spoken so casually I almost missed them. But they meant everything. It was like hearing a rescuer shout, I see you. Don't move. We're coming. I didn't realize I had been gripping my sweater sleeve so tightly that my knuckles ached. My chest expanded with the first full breath I had taken in months. Corbin couldn't touch Grandma's money. Couldn't sell her house. Couldn't erase her history with a forged pen stroke. Quiet justice had begun. Have you ever had that moment when the tiniest win feels like a mountain? When just a small pause, a single word in your favor, feels like the whole world shifted back to balance for a second. If you've had one of those, then you know exactly what I mean. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Martin squeezed my shoulder as we walked out. It's not victory yet, he reminded me. It's just a freeze. He'll fight back hard. And he was right. Because Corbin wasn't the type of man to take even a small obstacle quietly. The next week proved that. I began receiving letters, formal, cold, and dripping with accusation. Corbin's attorneys filed motions to dissolve the freeze, claiming I was unfit, unstable, and driven by bitterness. He even had the nerve to suggest that my head injury had caused distorted perceptions that were clouding my judgment. Reading those words made my blood boil, but at the same time they chilled me. Because I knew that was his weapon, making everyone think I was just a fragile woman cracking under grief. And the worst part, some of my family believed him. My uncle called me late one night, his voice sharp. Marielle, what are you doing? You're dragging this through the mud. You're embarrassing us. Corbin has been helping this family for years. He's a professional. You're just angry. I bit my tongue so hard I thought it might bleed. Angry. Course I was angry. But I wasn't blind. I wasn't stupid. And I wasn't wrong. That night, after hanging up on him, I sat at Grandma's old desk and stared at the flickering desk lamp. I thought about giving up. I thought about how much easier it would be to let Corbin have his way, let the family believe his lies, let the silence settle over everything like a heavy blanket. But then I looked at the draft will again. Her blank signature line. Her letter tucked in the recipe book. Her quiet warning that something felt wrong. And I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about honoring her instincts, her courage. Viewers, let me ask you something here. If you were in my shoes, would you keep fighting even if your family didn't believe you? Or would you walk away for the sake of peace? Comment below, I want to hear what you'd do. The weeks blurred into a fog of filings and deadlines. I worked with Sienna and Martin almost daily, chasing every breadcrumb. Bank records, draft, emails, metadata. Corbin's empire of polished lies started to look less like marble and more like paper walls ready to crumble if you poked the right spot. But with every document we uncovered, I felt his eyes on me. Not literally, not physically. But in that way predators make you feel watched even in daylight. His polished presence loomed at every hearing, his smile sharp as a knife when he caught my gaze. One day outside the courthouse, he leaned close as if to adjust his tie and whispered, "Freezes melt, Marielle. Just wait. I've been at this longer than you've been alive." I didn't answer him, but I walked to my car with my hand shaking on the door handle. Because I knew he wasn't bluffing. He was planning. And I couldn't guess how far he'd go this time. The freeze was only the first wall we'd built. But walls can be climbed, broken, tunneled under. And Corbin Hale had every tool money could buy. I tell you this because I need you to understand what it feels like when a tiny victory lights you up inside, but the shadow over your shoulder grows twice as long the next day. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And I didn't know then that the very recording I thought was just background noise would become the knife that cut through his lies. That part came later. But before it did, Corbin made his next move. One that nearly ended everything. And that's where the real storm began. Chapter 7. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not cold from air conditioning, but the kind of chill that seeps into your bones when you know you're about to put your entire life on the line. I sat there at the plaintiff's table, staring at the polished wood, tracing the tiny grooves in its surface with my fingertips, trying not to let my hands shake. When you wait for truth to finally come out, seconds stretch like hours. My stomach twisted, my palms damp against the paper in front of me. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but at the same time I wanted to stand up and scream. Both instincts fought inside me. Across the aisle, Corbin adjusted his cuffs. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and he chuckled, as if the entire courtroom was just another stage for him. His hair was slick, his suit perfect, his confidence unshaken. If you didn't know what I knew, if you didn't have the bruises I once carried or the letter tucked in that cedar chest, you might believe him too. He was so good at making lies look like order and truth look like chaos. That morning the judge announced we'd be reviewing preliminary evidence. My heart slammed harder in my chest. This was it. Not the final battle, but the moment that could turn everything. If the court dismissed my evidence as weak, if they believed Corbin's narrative over mine, then the freeze would melt away, and everything we'd fought for would vanish overnight. Martin gave me a small nod. He leaned toward the microphone and began calmly, carefully laying the groundwork. His voice was steady like he was reading a recipe, but each word carried weight. He introduced the inconsistencies. He pointed to the metadata. He showed the will draft with the missing signature. Piece by piece, he built the image of a man who polished his fraud so smoothly that most people never questioned it. But Corbin's attorney was just as smooth. She stood, hair tied back in a perfect bun, voice sharp as steel. "Your Honor, what we're seeing here is a family member twisting grief into paranoia. Mr. Hale has decades of spotless service. These claims are nothing more than speculation. And let me remind the court, this niece suffered a head injury, which may have influenced her perception of events." Her words echoed in my head like poison. I felt every eye in the room on me. Was I crazy? Was I paranoid? Was I making something out of nothing? I wanted to scream no. I wanted to shove the bruise pattern in their faces, hold up the letter, demand they see me. But all I could do was sit there and trust Martin and Sienna. And then Martin said, "We have one more piece of evidence to present, Your Honor." Audio. The room shifted. Corbin froze for just half a second, his eyes flickering toward us before he caught himself. But I saw it. I saw the panic he couldn't hide in time. Martin placed a small recorder on the desk. My recorder. The one that had sat on my kitchen counter that night, catching more than I ever expected. He pressed play. At first it was faint, static, the hum of the refrigerator, my voice confirming the flight. The background noise of a normal evening. People in the gallery leaned forward, trying to hear. Then came the sound of footsteps. Then came the thud. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered the pain, the tiles against my cheek, the way my blood had pooled warm by my ear. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from breaking down. And then his voice. Corbin's voice. Smooth, low, arrogant. That takes care of her. Just like it did with the old woman. Paperwork's already set. No one will ask. The words hung in the air like smoke. The entire courtroom froze. You could feel the silence press down, heavy and suffocating. No one coughed. No one shuffled papers. No one even breathed too loudly. It was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment that proved I wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't inventing anything. And yet, sitting there, I didn't feel triumph. Felt terror. Because I knew that a cornered man like Corbin was more dangerous than ever. Viewers, let me pause here to ask you. What would you feel if you were in that courtroom, listening to a man who had nearly erased your life confess in his own voice? Fear. Relief. Rage. Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you'd react. The judge's face was unreadable. The jury looked stunned. Even the clerk had stopped typing for a moment, her eyes wide. And across from me, Corbin sat perfectly still. His smile gone, his jaw tight. His fingers curling slowly into fists. The silence stretched. The recording ended with static, then clicked off. And all I could do was wait, because I knew his reaction would decide everything that came next. Chapter 8. The silence after that recording felt endless. It wasn't just silence. It was judgment, disbelief, the crack in a polished mask finally exposed. And in that suffocating quiet, I saw Corbin's true face, raw and unguarded. He shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, his nostrils flaring. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering urgently, but he pulled back sharply. For the first time, he looked less like a confident man of status and more like a cornered predator, dangerous and unpredictable. The judge cleared her throat, her gavel tapping once. Order in the court. But you can't order silence to return to normal when everyone has just heard the devil confess in his own voice. Corbin finally spoke. His voice came low, calm, steady, too steady. That recording is fabricated. This is a desperate attempt by a troubled woman to smear my name. Anyone with a cheap editing app can put words in my mouth. And let me remind the court, Your Honor, the opposing party has suffered head trauma. Her memory is unreliable. Her story keeps changing. And this, he gestured toward the recorder, dismissive, this is nothing more than theater. A murmur rippled through the room. His confidence was back, as if he'd rehearsed this denial in the mirror for weeks. Martin stood. Your Honor, we can authenticate this recording. The metadata confirms the date, time, and device. There is no alteration. But Corbin leaned forward, his eyes locking on mine across the aisle. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. It wasn't just a courtroom stare, it was a warning. And in that moment I felt it in my gut. He wasn't finished. Viewers, let me ask you something. What do you think a man like Corbin does when the walls close in? Does he collapse? Or does he fight even dirtier? Drop your thoughts below, because what happened next is something no one in that courtroom was ready for. The judge called for a brief recess. People stood, stretching, whispering. The gallery buzzed with a mix of shock and curiosity. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. I stayed seated. My knees were weak, my hands trembling under the desk. I wanted to believe it was over, that the recording was enough. But deep down I knew. A man like Corbin doesn't go down with one strike. During the recess, as people filed out, Corbin didn't leave. He stood at his table, fixing his cufflinks like nothing had happened. Then he turned his head just slightly. His lips curling into a faint smile meant only for me. It wasn't the smile of a man defeated. It was the smile of a man plotting. When we resumed, his lawyer shifted strategies. Instead of denying the tape outright, she began weaving a new story. Your Honor, my client has enemies. People who would love nothing more than to ruin his reputation. We cannot ignore the possibility that Ms. Marielle has been influenced by outside forces, people with money and motive. She has admitted to financial struggles, has she not? What better reason to invent lies than desperation? The sting of those words burned. I wanted to shout that I wasn't desperate for money, that I only wanted the truth. But sitting there, being accused in front of strangers, made me feel naked. Corbin's eyes stayed on me the entire time, as if he fed on my discomfort. Martin objected, his voice sharp. The judge sustained, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. That was Corbin's weapon, not truth but doubt. He only needed one juror to hesitate, one person to think maybe she is lying. As the day dragged on, Corbin's calm demeanor returned. He joked softly with his lawyer. He nodded politely to the judge. He even smiled at the jury as if he were the reasonable one in the room. And little by little, I felt the ground shift under my feet. By the end of the session, the judge scheduled a continuation for the following week. We weren't done. Not even close. When the gavel finally struck, my body felt drained, like I'd run a marathon on broken legs. I gathered my things slowly, trying to steady my breathing. Sienna squeezed my hand. "You were brave," she whispered. But bravery didn't feel like enough. As I walked toward the exit, the crowd parting around us, I felt a presence at my shoulder. A voice, low and venomous, barely audible over the chatter. "You think one tape will save you?" Corbin's words slid into my ear like poison. "I made you fall once. I can do it again." Froze. Sienna turned, but he had already moved away, blending into the sea of polished suits and curious faces. Outside, reporters shoved microphones forward, shouting questions. I kept my head down, pushing past them. The sky was gray, clouds rolling heavy, a storm threatening to break. And in that storm I knew. He wasn't bluffing. He was already planning his next move. Viewers, I need you here. What would you do if your enemy threatened you in broad daylight, knowing the world still believed in his mask? Would you fight harder, or would you run? Tell me below, because this is the moment where fear and resolve collide. That night, alone in my apartment, every creak of the floor, every shadow in the corner made my heart race. I double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains tight, kept my phone charged at all times. I wanted to feel safe, but safety was just an illusion. When I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I woke hours later to a sound that cut through the silence. A car engine idling outside my window. Froze. Slowly I pulled back the curtain. A black sedan sat across the street, headlights off, engine humming softly. And in the driver's seat, a silhouette. Watching. Waiting. The car didn't move for nearly an hour. And when it finally did, I knew it wasn't over. Corbin wasn't just fighting in court anymore. He had brought the war to my doorstep. Chapter 9. The sound of the car engine outside my window wasn't just noise. It was a threat. Whoa. Waiting. I froze in bed, staring at the faint orange glow of the streetlight through the curtains. My pulse drummed louder than the ticking wall clock. Whoever was inside that car didn't leave. Minutes passed, stretching into an hour. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. I knew it was him. Corbin. I whispered to myself. He's not done. Not yet. For weeks I had been telling myself that the freeze order, the recording, the allies I'd gathered, they were enough to keep me safe. But safety is a strange word when you're up against a man who doesn't believe in rules. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Martin, my attorney. Pre-trial hearing moved up. Be ready. Be ready. I wanted to laugh or cry or both. How do you prepare for a man who parks outside your home in the middle of the night like a wolf circling a fence? Viewers, pause for a moment and imagine this. What would you do if the person who tried to erase you from your own life was still out there circling, watching? Would you confront them? Would you run? Or would you, like me, cling to the paper trail and pray the truth was heavy enough to crush their lies? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the silhouette of the car until the sky began to pale, and only then did the engine fade and vanish down the road. When morning came, I found a note wedged under my front door. No envelope. No signature. Just 7 words written in neat, deliberate strokes. You won't make it to the stand. The paper shook in my hands. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and lungs. I told myself not to crumble, not now. But the truth. That note broke something inside me. Because it wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. I snapped a photo and sent it to Martin and Sienna. Within the hour, they were at my kitchen table, the 3 of us leaning over coffee mugs in fear. File a police report, Martin said, steady but tense. And what happens after that? Shot back. They tell me to lock my doors and stay inside. He's not afraid of locks. Sienna tapped her pen against the note, eyes sharp. But he is afraid of exposure. He's running out of places to hide. That's why he's trying to scare you now. Fear is the last tool of a man who knows he's cornered. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that night proved otherwise. It was just past 10 when the power went out. 1 second my kitchen glowed with soft yellow light, the next it plunged into darkness. The fridge stopped humming. Clock died. The silence felt alive. I grabbed my phone, the flashlight beam bouncing across the walls. And then I saw it. My back door cracked open an inch. I swear my soul left my body in that moment. I crept forward, phone trembling in my hand. The curtains fluttered slightly from the night air seeping in. I whispered my grandmother's name like a prayer, begging her for courage. And then footsteps, low, purposeful, on the porch. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed the door shut, threw the deadbolt, dragged a chair under the knob. My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. A shadow passed across the thin curtain of the door window. And then came his voice. Measured. A voice I'd heard in banks, in family meetings, in the courthouse lobby. Marielle, open the door. You don't have to drag this out. Every cell in my body screamed to scream back. But instead I stayed silent, pressing my palm against the wood like I could push him out with sheer willpower. Open it, he said again, lower this time. Or I'll open it for you. The seconds dragged. The air thickened. And then, suddenly, silence. No footsteps. No shadow. Had he left? Or was he waiting? I didn't dare move for what felt like an eternity. My phone battery was at 12%. I dialed Martin. Whispered into the speaker. He told me to stay put, police on the way. But by the time they arrived, the porch was empty. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. Just me, shaking in my kitchen with a broken sense of safety. One of the officers, a tired man with weary eyes, said, "Ma'am, it could have been kids. You've been through a lot. Stress can play tricks." I wanted to grab him by the collar and scream, "No, it was him, it was Corbin." But I didn't. Because I knew it wouldn't matter. To them, I was just another woman with a story too wild to prove. That's when it hit me. If I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on anyone else to believe me. I had to keep my paper trail alive, no matter how afraid I was. The next morning, Sienna came back with something. A stack of documents she'd pulled late at night. Forensic notes scribbled in the margins. "Look," she said, pointing at the pages. He changed dates on the power of attorney draft. Digital forensics show edits after your grandmother was already gone. It's not just sloppy, it's criminal. Her voice was fire. Her eyes steady. "We're going to nail him with this. But you can't lose your nerve now. He wants you rattled, because rattled people make mistakes in court." I stared at the papers, then at her. And for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something stronger than fear. Anger. "Then we make sure it's him who makes the mistakes," I whispered. But still the fear crept in at night. Every creak of the house. Every passing car. Every shadow that lingered too long on my street. By the time the pre-trial hearing arrived, I was running on coffee, adrenaline, and raw determination. The courthouse loomed like a fortress. I stepped through its doors, clutching my file of evidence like it was armor. Martin walked beside me, calm as ever, but I could feel the tension in his stride. Corbin was already there. Polished suit, hair perfect, smile practiced. He greeted people in the hallway like nothing in his life was crumbling. But when his eyes landed on me, the smile didn't reach them. It was cold, promising. Inside the courtroom I took my seat. My palms sweated against the wooden bench. The judge shuffled papers. Lawyers cleared throats. And then it began. Martin stood, steady and deliberate, laying out the request for all assets to remain frozen. His voice was firm, unshaken. He pointed to dates, inconsistencies, metadata. He spoke of doubt, not yet guilt, but enough to warrant pause. Corbin's lawyer countered with smooth words, dismissing everything as paranoia, as a grieving granddaughter grasping for conspiracy. My heart thumped so loud I was sure the entire room could hear. Then Martin pulled out the note. The 7 words slid across the judge's desk like a blade. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're alleging this came from the defendant." "We're not alleging, Your Honor," Martin said. "We're demonstrating a pattern. That forgeries, manipulations. It's all connected." The judge didn't speak right away. The silence felt endless. Finally, his gavel tapped lightly. All estate assets are to remain frozen until full trial. Mr. Hale, you are not to contact Ms. Duval directly or indirectly. Violation will result in contempt. The air left my lungs in a rush. I had won. Not the war but a battle. Enough to breathe again. Enough to live another day. Corbin's jaw tightened. His hand twitched near his cufflink. For the first time I saw a crack in his mask. But cracks are dangerous. Because when polished men begin to break, they don't crumble quietly. They shatter loud, violent, unpredictable. That night when I got home, I found something else waiting for me on the porch. Not a note, not a shadow. Small velvet box. Inside, my grandmother's wedding ring. And a scrap of paper beneath it. 5 words this time. Next time it's you. Chapter 10. The first time the recorder played in the courtroom, the sound was so faint I thought no one would hear it. Static. Hum. My grandmother's voice in the background. And then his. That takes care of her. Just like it did with the old woman. The words spilled into the room like poison. The jurors froze. The judge lifted his head. Even the bailiff's posture stiffened. You could feel the weight of it, as though every breath had been pulled from the air and pressed into a single, undeniable moment. I sat there gripping the edge of the wooden bench so tightly my knuckles went white. My heart hammered, my mouth dry. For months people had told me I was imagining things. That grief made me paranoid. That I was chasing shadows. But now they were all hearing it for themselves. The mask Corbin had polished for years cracked in less than 20 seconds of tape. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I could feel his fury radiating across the courtroom like heat from an open oven. "Play it again," the prosecutor said. And they did. The same chilling confession. The same arrogance in his tone. The same dismissal of a life he had taken like it was nothing. Viewers, let me ask you something. If you were sitting in that courtroom, hearing those words out loud for the first time, would your blood have run cold? Would you have believed me then? Or would you still look for excuses? Still cling to the idea that men in suits can't be killers? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The defense scrambled, of course. They argued about context, about background noise, about how anyone could have doctored the audio. But the jury wasn't looking at the lawyers anymore. They were looking at Corbin. And Corbin knew it. His jaw clenched. His hand shook as he straightened his tie. He whispered to his attorney, but his eyes darted, restless, desperate. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like what he really was, a cornered man. Martin leaned close to me and whispered, "This is it. This is the pivot." The prosecutor followed with a paper trail. Draft wills, metadata, witness statements tied back to Corbin's payroll. One by one, the breadcrumbs I had held onto through sleepless nights and whispered prayers were laid out under fluorescent lights for strangers to see. It felt like laying down pieces of my grandmother's life. Every page, every note, every inconsistency was a reminder that she had mattered. That her voice hadn't been erased. And when the bank records came up, the withdrawal for her flight, the reservation she never got to use, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Because that was proof she had wanted to live. Proof she hadn't just faded. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the click of evidence being projected on the screen. Each sound was a nail in Corbin's carefully built coffin. And yet, as the case closed in around him, I felt something strange. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just release. Like a storm finally breaking after years of pressure. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, voice steady but heavy. "Guilty. On all counts." The words echoed like bells inside my chest. My body sagged against the bench, and for the first time since the night of the attack, I let my tears fall freely. Life plus 75 years. That was his sentence. Corbin didn't speak. He didn't plead. He just stared at me with hollow eyes, as if trying to rewrite me one last time in his head. But it was over. My grandmother's legacy was safe. Her name, her story, her truth, All of it preserved. The judge dismissed us, the jurors filed out, the attorneys packed their bags. And still I sat there, staring at the wooden floor, unable to move. Martin touched my shoulder gently. "You did it." But I didn't feel like I had done it alone. I thought of Grandma's note in the recipe book, of the draft will in the cedar chest, of Sienna's sharp eye and Martin's steady patience, of every moment I'd been told to doubt myself. And then I thought of the kitchen recorder, the one tool no one knew I had, the tiny device that captured the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. That recorder hadn't just saved my case, had saved me. As I walked out of the courthouse, the air smelled different, lighter. The sky stretched wide, clouds drifting lazy above the steps. Reporters shouted questions, microphones pushed forward. I ignored them all. Because this wasn't about spectacle. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Quiet, patient, undeniable justice. And it was about the lesson my grandmother had always tried to teach me. That kindness is not weakness. That being overlooked doesn't mean being erased. That sometimes the smallest voice can shake the loudest room. Viewers, I need to pause here and ask you something important. Have you ever felt invisible, like your truth didn't matter? Have you ever been told to stay quiet, to let it go, to move on? Because if you have, let my story be your reminder. Silence doesn't mean surrender. You are not disposable. You are not erased. I am Marielle Duval. And this was my confession. But before I close, let me leave you with this. Stories like mine don't end neatly. There are scars, there are shadows, and there are nights when I still hear car engines outside my window. Justice doesn't erase fear. Just gives you the strength to face it. So if you've listened this far, don't let my grandmother's story stop here. Share this video, comment below with your thoughts, and tell us who you fight for, whose memory you protect. Someone out there needs your words more than you think. And make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because the next story I'll share will take you even deeper into the shadows of betrayal and into the light of redemption. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe, stay kind, and remember, quiet justice is still justice.